Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum, and welcome to another edition of Debunked here on INX Prime. My name is Sulaimaan Ravat. Today we focus on Donald Trump, and that name kind of just results in all sorts of different emotions, from laughter on one side to anger on the other side, in terms of the consequence of some decisions and actions. Not too long ago, we saw what happened in Venezuela. Of late, it's been all the talk and rhetoric and the different kind of reports in as far as Greenland is concerned. And many are trying to make sense of it. What's going on here in specific relation to Greenland, which is in the news at the moment. But even in terms of the bigger picture, what happened to Venezuela? What can happen to Greenland? What are the similarities? What are the differences? Then Iran has also been in the news, and there's been talk about possible strikes on Iran. People have gone to the point of asking a question and saying, well, South Africa is also on his hit list. Could we face a situation where South Africa also becomes a target in the way that either Venezuela or others are going to be targeted? And those are some of the aspects that we are going to be unpacking on the program today. Our guest is Naeem Jeenah, a well-known researcher with AMAC and political analyst. Naeem, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair.
So, there are a few rather overarching issues, and then there are specifics, and I think we'll just try and take them one at a time, and there'll probably be a little bit of kind of overlap. But it's also January, right? I think was it yesterday or the other day I saw a headline somewhere that it marked 1 year since Trump was sworn in for the second term. Did he come with a very specific mission into the White House for this second term, which is now manifesting in these various examples that I have mentioned in my introduction, and others which I did not list?
I think he did. I think in his first term, he wanted to be a very assertive, muscular president, in a sense following on the kind of agendas that existed in the Republican Party, but taking them further. In his second term, he came with a more, or rather a clearer kind of agenda and objective. And that is to stamp his name on the global scene, as well as the local scene in the US, and build a particular kind of a program that would be associated with him, both in the US and globally. And I think that what we're seeing playing out is that. Also, that he realized, it seems, that he actually had the power to be able to do these things through his executive orders, etc. And he's utilizing that power much more now than he did in his first term.
Is there kind of strategy, coherence, that flows from his decisions? Because there was a stage, and perhaps even now, that some analysts say, with Trump, it's about which side of the bed he wakes up on in the morning, because he may say one thing today and say another thing tomorrow. He's big friends with Musk one day, then they're having it out against each other on social media, and then they pals again the next. We know he's a very different type of individual in the White House from what we've seen previously. And whilst there may not be any justification for a lot of what he's doing, is there a kind of coherence? Is there actually a plan that he's working with?
So on a day-to-day basis, I would agree that it depends on which side of the bed he wakes up on. Even including, for example, an ally as close as Israel. He'd say one thing one day and the next day something else. I mean, by many reports, his New Year's Day party, to which Netanyahu was invited, he gave Netanyahu the guarantee that the US will be on board on a war with Iran. When the protest started, he seemed to be following through on that. And then, one day, 10 days later, or 2 weeks later, he just decided everything's fine and, that's not going to happen, which then forced the Israelis also to walk back in a sense. So on a day-to-day basis, on an issue-to-issue basis, he's extremely unpredictable. He could change even within hours rather than days. But on a long-term basis, I think that there is a strategy, there is a long-term plan. And that plan is, one of the main pillars of that plan is to ensure that the Western Hemisphere is an American hemisphere, that the United States exerts full control over that hemisphere. Secondly, to change the whole discourse around things like migration, and those kinds of things that will impact not only on the US, but also on foreign countries. Thirdly, to dismantle, if possible, multilateral organizations and ensure that there is, we return to a kind of firm unipolar world, where the United States is the global hegemon. But that doesn't mean necessarily increasing military bases, etc. He believes that hegemony can be done in different ways, and one of those ways, of course, is economic, and his favorite tool is tariffs, as far as that is concerned. And lastly, a very strong kind of national security doctrine that favors the United States, and against which no country, no people is exempt. It's US first, and whatever works to improve the US or improve US hegemony is what is important. So I think if we look at the kind of broad sense, that's the kind of agenda. And it's not only an agenda that he stands by, but also those closest to him. Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, etc. That's the agenda they follow.
So that was going to be my next question, right? That who's pulling his strings? Is he his own man? We know that Trump has been, for the better part of his life, a businessman. He kind of entered politics not too long ago. I think he was more surprised than anyone else when he beat Hillary Clinton the first time around. Then he got into office. Now there's all this talk about the big tech guys like Musk and others being very close to him. There's all this talk about mega and make America great again. Is Trump pursuing an agenda that is his own, or is it someone else's agenda, or is it also intertwined with the Trump family's long-term business interests?
I think it's his agenda, together with his family's business interests, and that agenda is very useful for a whole range of other players. I mean, the tech bros and their agenda kind of dovetails with Trump's, and that's why they're happy to support him. And so too with various other players. His agenda, of course, includes him, being the most popular man alive ever. And so he also plays to his base and what they want. As far as the MAGA issue is concerned, so, America first, make America great again is, in a sense, a foundation of his agenda. But what does that mean in specific terms? He also watches carefully how that MAGA base discusses things and moves in different directions. So Israel, for example, is a good case study for how his MAGA base has split. Half of it being Israel first, in a sense, and the other half saying that America first means that we shouldn't be subject to Israeli needs and Israeli diktat. He watches that play out. He plays one side against the other, but overall, it's his agenda that others play too. And this is a really good case study, I would say, for how one man can develop an entire system or change an entire system to revolve around him. And for Trump, that system is not just the United States, but globally. And so you see even European heads of states, the senior leaders of NATO, of the EU, etc., fall over themselves in order to ingratiate themselves to him and, in a sense, fall in line with his agenda. That, I think, is that thing about the US and the Europeans and NATO, that's starting to come apart with the whole Greenland story. But they also have kind of been lining up to play according to his agenda.
So we are chatting to Naeem Jeenah here on Debunked, and we've been talking about Trump and his strategy and his approach from the time he took office for the second time a year ago, and whether it's his own agenda or whose agenda it is. And we were focusing on Greenland, and Naeem was taking us through in list of importance and priority. What is it about Greenland that actually interests Trump, and the geographical location and the strategic benefit and the melting of the ice and the minerals that have been unearthed. So Naeem, you can pick it up from there.
So the first 2 points I mentioned, both in a sense economic. The one is access to those critical minerals in Greenland. The second regarding the shipping routes. But the shipping routes issue is also a strategic matter, not just economic. The US regards China as its main strategic rival, and a big part of the reason for that is the economic. And so keeping China back is an important strategic concern. The third issue, which I think is the most important one, and Trump has said so himself. I mean, when he talks about taking over Greenland, he said the US has to control it because it's of national security interest to the United States. And this is the issue. The strategic concern is that on the one side of Greenland, or one side of the Arctic Circle, you have Russia, and on the other side of Russia is China. The distance that separates the United States from Russia, from Alaska is US territory. There's a strait of 84 kilometers. So 84 kilometers of water, literally, that separates the United States from Russia. And then there's a piece of Russia, and on the other side of that is China. So from the US perspective, they see themselves as kind of being vulnerable to both Russia and China. Russia on its coast is now unmothballing a number of military bases that had been mothballed after the Soviet Union fell, re-establishing, in a sense, its military presence on that Arctic coast. And what Trump wants is a greater kind of dominance over the Arctic Circle in terms of these issues. So Greenland is well positioned for things like military bases, aircraft bases, more importantly, perhaps surveillance systems to be set up there, radars, etc., to be able to monitor, spy on both Russia and China from that perspective. The odd thing here, I should just say, is that Denmark, of which Greenland is a part, has repeatedly said, well, first let me just say, Denmark is an extremely close ally, or has been, of the United States. All its weaponry for the Danish military has been purchased from the United States, not even from other European states, from the US. In terms of American wars overseas, Denmark has supplied per capita more soldiers to American wars than any other country. So they're extremely close allies. And Denmark has also repeatedly said to the United States that the northern part of Greenland is, essentially unpopulated, is open for use, and you can mine there, you can set up your data centers there, you can even set up military bases and surveillance systems, etc. But you can't take control of the island. And for Donald Trump and those around him, even that is not acceptable. And of course, part of it is that they see Greenland as being part of the North American continent, and everything in the Western Hemisphere must be under US control, not anyone else's control. So South America, the entire South America must be under US control. We saw what happened in Venezuela, and that includes Greenland. And he's willing to go as far with that as threatening even the NATO alliance.
So that's where actually I wanted to pick it up from, that what's he likely to do in Europe now? I mean, the world was shocked when a president was kidnapped in the case of Venezuela, right? And there was a reaction, some louder and some not that loud and some perhaps muted. Could we see similar tactics, or the circumstances very different? Say, for example, in the case of Iran, could we see a full-scale invasion by the US and the direct toppling of a regime, or not?
So I think that the Western Hemisphere, as they refer to it, they regard in a special kind of way. South America is their backyard, or Latin America is their backyard, and they should be allowed to do whatever they like there. This is, the Monroe Doctrine rephrased now as the Donroe Doctrine by Trump, and that of course includes Greenland. So there's special ways in which they deal with the Western Hemisphere, other ways in which they deal with the rest. As far as Europe is concerned, I mean, I don't think that we're going to see the King of Denmark or Emmanuel Macron being kidnapped in the same kind of way, but they can be dealt with in other ways, or Canada for that matter. Other ways meaning things like tariffs, sanctions, etc. And he's threatened. I mean, 2 days ago, when someone said to him that Emmanuel Macron has decided not to join his so-called Board of Peace, he said, well, I'll just put 200% tariffs on all his wines and champagnes, and then we'll see what he'll do. So there's a different way in which Europe will be dealt with. Europe is still seen as a kind of partner. I don't think that the word ally is the correct word to use, but Europeans are seen as partners in some or other way, in a very transactional way. As far as other parts of the world, particularly in the global south, are concerned, that depends on how profitable it is. So with Iran, for example, what does the US have to gain or lose if it were to invade or try decapitation, etc.? It has too much to lose. And so it's not going to go that way. He might increase sanctions, which, Iran sits with some of the worst sanctions in the world ever, perhaps with the possible exclusion of Cuba. So he might increase sanctions, but he's not going to go for a full-scale invasion. The Israelis have tried to pull him or pull the US into that, but he's very wary of getting involved in that kind of a thing where the US will actually lose out. Similarly with other places. The one place where he might treat it much more seriously than Iran or Europe is China. China is, for the US, for Trump at least, kind of an existential threat in terms of the economic competition, but also China's threat against Taiwan. China believes that Taiwan is Chinese territory and should be part of China, shouldn't be an independent state. The issue about Taiwan, this little island, is that it produces, 90% or something of the superconductors that are used in the most advanced computers, AI systems, etc. And if that were to fall in Chinese hands, that would leave the United States very, very far behind. So there's a special case with China. So I think that he looks at different parts of the world in different ways, depending on how profitable it is for him and for the United States.
In the meanwhile, how has his business interests, or the Trump family's business interests, been benefiting from all of these political decisions?
Quite a bit. I mean, the best example, of course, is Saudi Arabia. Trump's son-in-law, his son, etc., all of them in different kinds of businesses benefit from these things. The Saudis are playing that game very well. I don't believe that Saudi Arabia has the same kind of relationship with the United States now as it did 5 years ago, or even more so 10 years ago. But they play to the way that Trump wants to play the game. And a lot of that has to do with business. And Trump's family benefits from that. But it's not only his family, it's also those whose support he requires. So your Elon Musks and your Peter Thiels, etc., also benefit from these kinds of things. It's not inconceivable that they will hugely benefit from Trump taking over Greenland. setting up data centers there in that cold and all of that. So those kinds of things factor in very strongly into how he does things, even though sometimes he does get it wrong. I mean, American oil companies are not really that interested in Venezuela as he thinks they should be.
So this disruption, if you want, of the existing world order, will it benefit the US in the short term, and could it come back to haunt it in the long term? I mean, is this going to kind of force Europe and even the global South to kind of form some sort of a united front?
You know, I don't know that it's actually going to benefit the United States even in the short term. You know, this notion of of imposing tariffs. He's now, of course, imposed 10% tariffs on, I think, 6 European states, including the UK, because of their position on Greenland, and has threatened that if they don't give him Greenland by the 1st of June, he'll increase that by another 25%. But, you know, whether he misunderstands this or whether it's just good rhetoric for his base, etc., the fact is that these countries don't have to pay the extra 10 or 25%. It's his own citizens who pay. Yes, that does mean that their exports into the United States will decrease, but still, they're not paying for it. So in the short term, even, I don't see how all of this is benefiting the United States in any kind of great way. Economic figures, in fact, show that all his boasting about how great the American economy now is after a year of his rule is actually not true. In the longer term, many analysts have said that the United States now is a declining empire. And I think that what Trump is doing is he's actually speeding up that decline. So in the long term, certainly, we're looking to a weakened United States that will become just another country. But part of that whole process of weakening, etc., is the way he deals with his allies and the rest of the world. I mean, taking over Greenland could very much potentially see a breakup of NATO. And so you'll find the United States on one side and all its former European allies on the other. That could have a huge impact on the global situation. I mean, in Europe, for example, they have for more than half a century after the so-called Second World War relied on the United States for a security guarantee. If NATO falls apart, in many of these countries, the US will withdraw or close down their bases. In some, they might be asked to close down their bases. That would mean that European states would become more vulnerable to each other. I mean, the First and Second World Wars, as they are called, were basically European tribal wars. The US security guarantee is to prevent Europeans from killing each other. If they were not there, what would then happen? The other issue is that over the past 70-odd years, since the so-called Second World War, European states have diverted large amounts of their money from military spending to welfare spending. And so all of these European states that have good welfare nets that even are social democratic is because they don't have to spend as much money on the military. That has started changing from last year. Last year, the Europeans adopted a program called Rearm Europe. They're now moving money from welfare and other such programs into the military, and that will then create chaos within their states with citizens who have long relied on these welfare nets, including older people, and much of Europe has a very old demographic, including older people whose pensions will get cut down. You'll have conflict within states, conflict between states. This could result in huge global upheavals, certainly in Europe, between Europe and the US. And then in the global south, of course, what this is also doing is spurring a kind of situation where global south states are looking at each other. How can they band together? This, in a sense, started, with the genocide in Gaza, but has sped up in other ways. How they can work with each other in order to develop their own economies, etc. South Africa is very much part of this. As far as China is concerned, it's a Belt and Road Initiative through mostly global South states will speed up. Its relations with Europe will improve, and there'll be a kind of informal alliance, I think, between China and European states that will exclude the US. But also, what Trump 1 has done in Europe is that it spurred the development of the right wing in Europe. So parties that we previously saw as being fringe elements on the margins that just make interesting noises are now winning elections. I mean, one of the first people to agree to join Trump's Board of Peace was Viktor Orban, the right-wing president of Hungary. And so with with NATO falling apart, etc., these kind of elements will also gain strength. And so huge chaos in the future in Europe could result.
Naeem, as always, fascinating talking to you. Shukran so much for your time.
Jazakumullah khair.
That's it for today's edition of Debunked. Until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.